Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepless Scientist, a quiet place in the cosmos where your thoughts can unwind, and knowledge becomes a soft lullaby for the night. Tonight's journey will take us into one of the most mysterious questions ever whispered by human minds. Does consciousness shape reality? Is the world outside you entirely independent? Or is there a subtle sense in which your awareness participates in its unfolding? Before we settle in and begin wandering through this thought, I'd love it if you could take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Only if these gentle explorations truly bring you comfort. And when you're ready, leave a comment to let me know where in the world you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. It's always a joy to see the constellation of listeners stretching across continents and time zones, each one resting in their own slice of the night. So, if you haven't already, feel free to dim the lights, draw the blanket a little closer, and perhaps let a fan or heater add its quiet hum to the room. You might even set a sleep timer so that this story fades away only after you've drifted into dreams. Now, let your shoulders sink, your breath soften, and your mind relax into a rhythm that doesn't need to hurry anywhere. Tonight we are stepping gently into a question that is not meant to be solved like a puzzle, but explored like a walk through a twilight garden. Let's begin. Imagine holding a snow globe in your hands. When it rests on the table, the world inside seems still, a miniature town or a little forest frozen in place. But give it the slightest shake, and suddenly everything changes. Snowflakes swirl into existence, patterns shift, and the scene is no longer what it was before your touch. Consciousness, your simple act of noticing, can sometimes feel a little like that shake. The question is, are you merely watching the snow drift, or are you, in some deeper way, the reason it falls at all? Science, that careful lantern we carry into the darkness, has spent centuries asking what role observation plays in the universe, and for the most part the answers felt solid. The world was out there, independent and unbothered by your gaze. The apple fell whether Newton noticed it or not. The moon circled the Earth whether or not Galileo trained his telescope upon it. Reality, it seemed, had no need of witnesses. But then physics stumbled into the realm of the very small, and there, the tidy certainty of objectivity began to shimmer. The famous double-slit experiment is a story worth telling slowly, because in its simplicity lies a strangeness that has kept thinkers awake at night for more than a century. Imagine shining a light, not onto a wall, but through a thin screen cut with two narrow openings. If light was simply made of particles, tiny bullets of brightness, you would expect to see two neat stripes of illumination on the far wall, like footprints marching side by side. But when the experiment was done, what appeared was not two stripes, but a series of bands, light and dark, repeating like the ripples that appear when two stones are dropped into a pond. Light, it seemed, was not a shower of particles, but a wave, spreading and interfering with itself. The plot thickens when we change one detail. Place a detector at the slits, something to measure which opening the particle of light passes through. Suddenly, the delicate wave pattern vanishes. The stripes appear just as if light were little bullets again. In other words, simply by observing, by trying to peek at which path the light takes, we change the outcome. Without observation, it behaves like a wave of possibilities. With observation, it collapses into a single fact. It is here, at this quiet threshold, that the whisper of consciousness enters. Is it the machine, the detector, that makes the difference? Or is it somehow the fact that someone will eventually read the result? Physicists still debate. Some insist it is simply the act of measurement, a physical interaction, that breaks the wave of maybes into one definite outcome. Others cautiously wonder if the presence of a conscious observer might be woven into the very act of reality taking form. For a bedtime listener, perhaps it is enough to hold the image of that wall, two different patterns depending on whether anyone is watching. The universe, it seems, is not indifferent to being noticed. Think of it this way. When you sit in a room at dusk, the world around you is painted in fading shadows. The chair is still a chair, the cup still a cup, but until you turn on the lamp, much of the detail remains hidden. Your eyes, your noticing, bring out contours and colours. Now imagine, just for a moment, that this isn't only true of the way you see the world, but of the way the world is, not simply revealed by your awareness, but actualised by it. That is the heart of tonight's exploration. This doesn't mean you are creating mountains or galaxies with a casual glance. No more than shaking a snow globe creates the entire town inside it. But it does suggest a mystery, that perhaps the boundary between what is out there and what is in here is not as clear as we once believed. And so, as you let your breathing slow, picture yourself as both witness and participant. Every moment, every sound, every flicker of thought is part of a dance between the world and the awareness that beholds it. You're not merely drifting through a universe that ignores you. You are, in some quiet and profound way, part of the story of how it appears at all. In the sessions to come, we will wander through many perspectives on this question. Ancient traditions that imagine consciousness as the fabric of existence. Modern theories that measure awareness as if it were a kind of woven information, and everyday examples where belief and perception seem to bend what we call reality. Now rest with the image of that snow globe, its flakes suspended waiting for the gentle touch that sets them moving. Reality itself may be waiting in a similar way, not inert but poised for the moment of your attention. If we just spoke of the snow globe and the shimmering wave patterns of light, then tonight's next step is to linger with the question that hides inside them. What does it really mean to observe? The word itself sounds so simple, like something passive. You glance at a flower, you watch a bird take flight, you notice the clouds gathering before rain. It feels like you're only receiving, as if your eyes were little windows and the world was playing its theatre just for you. But the experiments we just described hint at something more unsettling, that observation is not merely watching, but perhaps shaping. Let's take a slower walk into the double-slit experiment once more, because its details are the kind that reward lingering. Imagine you're sitting in front of that wall, the one where the light or electrons will land. You run the experiment without any detectors in place, just the slits and the particles. One by one, the electrons strike the wall. At first, they seem random, tiny pinpricks of brightness in no particular order. But after hundreds, then thousands of them accumulate, a pattern emerges, an interference pattern, like the undulating shadows of ripples crossing one another. Each electron impossibly appears to have passed through both slits at once, interfering with itself as a wave. Now, you add a detector, something to ask, which slit did it go through? Suddenly the interference disappears, and the electrons arrange themselves into two neat bands. The particles behave like particles again. The only difference between the two runs is whether or not you looked. Of course, in physics, this looking is described as a measurement, a detector interacting with the particle. But here is the part that makes the mind pause in wonder. The measurement could be delayed, even made after the electron has already crossed the slits, and still the result seems to bend to whether it was observed. John Wheeler's famous delayed choice experiment made this paradox vivid. It was as though the past itself had been undecided until the moment of observation. Picture reading the end of a mystery novel, only to discover that your choice of which edition you bought last week has rewritten the middle chapters. Or imagine baking bread, pulling it from the oven, and only then deciding whether you'd used yeast or not, only to find the loaf obeys your decision. The world, it seems, does not always line up neatly with the cause and effect timeline we're used to in daily life. Now, scientists are cautious here. Most will tell you it is not consciousness that is doing the collapsing, but the act of physical interaction, the registering of information in any form. Still, there lingers an unease. After all, what is information if no conscious being ever reads it? If the detector records the data but no one ever sees it, Has the wave truly collapsed? Or does the pattern remain a ghost until a mind takes notice? This is where philosophy tiptoes in alongside physics. Some interpretations, like the Copenhagen view, simply shrug and say, the quantum world is a cloud of probabilities until observed, and that is the end of it. Others, like the many worlds interpretation, avoid the collapse altogether by suggesting that every possible outcome occurs in branching realities. But hovering nearby is always the question. If consciousness plays no role, why does our noticing feel so entangled with the unfolding of the world? Think of your own experience of a quiet room. The lamp is steady, the air is still. Yet the moment you bring your attention to the hum of the refrigerator, it seems louder. The instant you focus on the ticking of the clock, time seems more present. Observation does not merely reveal, it amplifies, sharpens, perhaps even alters the quality of what is observed. And here lies the tension that has carried across centuries. Is reality entirely indifferent to us, existing in its own way, regardless of witnesses? Or is our perception somehow a thread in the fabric itself? Even great physicists disagreed. Niels Bohr argued that quantum phenomena have no meaning until observed. Albert Einstein, famously skeptical, countered with his remark, "Do you really believe the moon is not there when you're not looking at it?" He insisted reality must be independent of our gaze, yet the experiments stubbornly sit in the middle, refusing to give a simple resolution. For the purposes of our journey tonight, it is enough to rest in that mystery. You do not need to pick a side. Instead, picture the universe as a theatre where the curtain only ever rises when an audience member steps into the seats. The play has always been rehearsed, the actors ready, the props in place. But until you arrive, the stage remains dark. Does your arrival create the performance or simply call it forth? As you lie back and let your breath steady, you can imagine yourself not just as a spectator, but as part of that stage lighting. Your awareness falls like a spotlight on each detail. The colour of your blanket, the sound of a car outside, the memory that drifts into view. Without your noticing, these details might as well be backstage, waiting. With your noticing, they are illuminated, made real in your experience. This does not mean you are conjuring galaxies from nothing, but it does suggest that what we call reality is always a partnership, a duet between the world's possibilities and your awareness of them. That duet is delicate, mysterious, and far from settled. And it is here, in this delicate dance of looking and being looked at, that we find the beginning of the illusion of objectivity, the comforting idea that reality is wholly separate from us. That illusion may be more fragile than we once thought. So as we drift further tonight, hold close the image of those two patterns on the wall, the rippling waves when unobserved, the neat stripes when watched. Reality wears different masks, depending on whether we pay attention. And if something as small as a particle behaves differently under our gaze, what might that mean for the larger fabric of existence? That question will be our companion as we continue, gently, slowly, into the heart of this mystery. If the first steps of our journey introduced you to the strange theatre of the observer effect, then let us now pause in front of the curtain itself. Between the world as potential and the world as actual lies a veil, thin yet impenetrable, that only seems to part when someone looks. This veil is what physicists call the wave function, a cloud of possibilities, a spread of maybes, a shimmering catalogue of what could be. It is easy to think of reality as a solid chain of events. The ball rolls across the floor, the cup tips and spills, the cat leaps onto the table. But in the quantum world, before the ball is rolled, before the cup is tipped, every outcome lives in a haze of probabilities. Only when observed does the haze collapse into one story, one line of events that we then call real. Imagine a book on a shelf, its ending unwritten until you decide to open it. All possible endings sit there in inkless silence. Tragedy, comedy, mystery, even the pages left blank. The moment you turn to the final chapter, the letters appear and the story completes itself. That is the gentle image of the wave function collapsing, a cloud of unrealized endings resolving into the one that now feels inevitable. It is important to understand that physicists did not invent this cloud of maybes for the sake of poetry. They were forced into it by experiments. Particles behave as if they are not just in one place, but in many at once. An electron seems smeared across space, a ghost of itself in multiple locations. Only when we measure, when we choose to look, does it decide on one location. Until then, it is not quite anywhere, or perhaps it is everywhere in the smallest of ways. And here lies a quiet wonder. The difference between potential and actual is not one of distance, but of attention. The potential world hums quietly in the background, like the unread chapters of a book. The actual world is the story unfolding in your hands. Consciousness, in this analogy, is not the author, but the reader, who calls the words into presence. Without the reader, the story may exist, but it lies dormant, unseen, unlived. There is a gentleness to this view, even if the mathematics that underpins it is anything but gentle. Equations describe probability waves, interference and collapse with precise numbers, but you do not need numbers to grasp the essence. It is enough to picture a coin suspended in mid-air, neither heads nor tails, until the instant it lands and you open your hand to see. The possibilities were always there, but the act of noticing is what turns possibility into experience. Some thinkers see in this curtain between potential and actual a profound metaphor for human life itself. How many futures lie within you at any given moment? The decision to take a walk or stay home, to speak or to remain silent, to turn left or right at a corner. In each instant, your life is a branching tree of probabilities. You walk only one path, but the others hover as shadows of what might have been. Physics suggests that even the universe may work in this way, brimming with potentials that crystallize only when observed. And yet, caution is needed. Many physicists will remind us, do not rush to assign magical powers to consciousness. The collapse of the wave function might simply be a matter of interaction, not awareness. The detector itself may suffice to tip the balance. Regardless of whether a human eye ever looks at the result, still, the mystery remains, because the detector's record has no meaning until some conscious being interprets it. Numbers on a machine are not reality in the human sense until they are read. Perhaps the safest way to frame it, especially as we drift into sleep, is to see observation as a bridge. On one side, a vast landscape of potentials. On the other, the single path we call experience. Consciousness does not build the bridge, but it is the one that walks across, turning the mist of maybes into the ground beneath your feet. Picture standing at the edge of a foggy valley at dawn. All around you, shapes are suggested but not clear. The fog curls and drifts, hinting at mountains, rivers and trees. As the sun rises, details sharpen. A mountain here, a path there, a glint of water. The valley was always there, but it becomes real to you only as it emerges from the haze. So it is with the wave function and observation. Potential made actual by the act of seeing. In the stillness of night, this thought can be oddly comforting. You're not only moving through a fixed, immutable world, you're participating in the unveiling of it moment by moment through the simple act of awareness. Reality is not a solid wall you bump against, but a curtain that parts as you pass through, always showing more, always holding mysteries just out of view. And as you drift deeper into rest, you might let yourself feel part of that dance. The possibilities of tomorrow stretch out like the foggy valley. What you notice, what you attend to, may be the very things that come into focus. Consciousness as a gentle hand on the curtain, drawing it open to reveal the next scene. Not control, not creation in the grandiose sense, but participation, and perhaps that is enough to make each moment shimmer a little more. The curtain of probabilities we lingered on a moment ago already feels uncanny, but physics, with its talent for deepening mysteries rather than tidying them away, adds yet another twist. What if the outcome of an event is not only decided by whether we look, but by when we look? This is the riddle posed by John Wheeler's delayed choice experiment, a puzzle that seems to suggest that the present act of observation can ripple backward, deciding what the past must have been. Imagine once more the double-slit stage. Light or electrons approach the slits, not yet committed to behaving like particles or waves. If you measure their path at the slits, you get two neat bands, the mark of particles. If you refrain, you get an interference pattern, the signature of waves. Simple enough. But Wheeler asked, what if you postpone your choice until after the particle has already passed through the slits? At that point, surely the particle must have decided already. It has either gone through one slit or both. The history should be sealed, and yet when the experiment is arranged this way, when the decision to observe is delayed, the outcome still bends to the choice. If you decide to measure, the past looks as though the particle went through one slit. If you decide not to measure, the past looks as though it went through both. The observation made in the present seems to rewrite the history behind it. It is as if you opened a diary written years ago and found the words reshaping themselves under your gaze, adjusting to match what you now expect to find. Or like standing in a kitchen tasting a stew and discovering that your opinion today somehow influences which spices your earlier self had stirred in. The very order of time feels pliable, as though cause and effect are less like a line of dominoes and more like a web, where tugging at one thread shakes the whole pattern. Of course, physicists are careful here. They will say that no literal rewriting of the past occurs. The mathematics describes it as the collapse of possibilities extending through space-time, not a time machine scribbling in the margins. But the image lingers. Until observation, the past itself seems uncertain, fluid, waiting. Einstein, who loved order and disliked loose ends, once protested with his famous remark, "God does not play dice." To which Bohr, defending the Copenhagen view, replied, "Einstein, stop telling God what to do." Between them, two visions of the universe clashed, one insisting on a reality independent of us, the other accepting a reality that does not fully crystallize without our participation. The delayed choice experiment seems to lean toward Bohr's side, but in truth, it offers no comfort to either. It suggests something stranger still, that reality may not unfold in a tidy linear sequence at all. Think of your own memory. When you recall a childhood moment, perhaps the first day of school, or a time you fell while learning to ride a bicycle, the memory is not a frozen photograph. It shifts subtly each time you bring it to mind, coloured by your current feelings, reshaped by the act of remembering. Neuroscientists call this reconsolidation. The memory is rewritten in the present, influenced by who you are now. Wheeler's experiment whispers a parallel truth about the physical world itself, that what we call the past may be in some sense a story still open to editing. Now, does this mean your thoughts today can literally alter yesterday's breakfast? No. Physics does not allow us to rewrite history in the casual, time-travelling sense of fantasy novels. But it does mean that the line between past and present is not as sharp as the ticking of a clock suggests. The act of observation stitches them together, making what was once indefinite into something definite. Picture a play being performed on stage. The actors know the outlines of the script, but the details of each scene are left unwritten until the spotlight turns their way. When you shine the light on Act 2, it locks into place. When you shine the light on Act 3, that too becomes solid. And oddly enough, Act 1 may only take its final shape once the later scenes have been illuminated. The story of the play is continuous, but the solidity of its past may depend on how the audience chooses to watch. For many listeners, this may sound like a paradox too heavy for bedtime, but let it rest as a soft suggestion, not a demand for belief. You don't need to solve it. You only need to feel the wonder that such an experiment exists, that human curiosity has found ways to coax nature into revealing its uncanny edges, and perhaps you can carry the lesson into your own reflections. The choices you make today shape not only your future, but also the meaning of your past. A painful memory reframed in compassion becomes less a scar and more a lesson. A small act of kindness years ago may glow brighter when you notice its ripple in your life today. Just as in Wheeler's thought experiment, observation in the present can alter the significance of what came before. As your body sinks deeper into rest, consider that the universe itself may be more like a woven fabric than a straight timeline. The threads of past, present, and future are knotted together, and your consciousness is part of the weaving. In this fabric, observation does not merely look, it participates. It draws patterns out of the haze, not just forward into the future, but back through the shadows we call the past. And so, with this image of time as a curtain that drapes both directions, let us continue our quiet journey. Ahead lies the question of whether this delicate interplay between observer and observed stops at the quantum scale, or whether, in ways both subtle and profound, it shapes the larger world you touch every day. By now, you might feel as though we've been balancing on a very delicate edge, peering into experiments so subtle they take place in the invisible world of particles and probabilities. The double slit, the wave function, the delayed choice, these belong to the quiet stage of quantum physics, a realm so far removed from daily life that you might wonder, does any of this matter when I pour my morning tea, when I listen to the rain, when I turn a key in a lock? Surely electrons are mischievous, but the world of chairs, trees and clouds should be solid, indifferent to our gaze, shouldn't it? And yet, the boundary between microscopic and macroscopic, between particle and person, is not as sharp as we often assume. To explore this, let us wander slowly from the lab bench into the living room, where perception itself becomes our experiment. Start with your eyes. Each moment, photons, tiny packets of light, stream into them. But you do not see all that enters. Instead, your brain pieces together a version of the world, filling in gaps and smoothing over rough edges. Take the blind spot, for instance. Each eye has a patch where the optic nerve connects, a place that registers nothing. You never notice the hole because your brain paints over it, borrowing texture and colour from the surrounding scene. You think you're observing the world directly, but in truth your mind is stitching a tapestry from fragments. Now, consider illusions. The dress that some swore was blue and black while others saw it as white and gold. The audio clip where half of us heard Laurel and the rest, Yanni. In both cases, the stimulus was the same. The difference lay not in the world, but in the way consciousness interpreted it. If observation simply revealed reality, we would all agree. But instead, perception reveals itself as an active participant, shaping the picture you call real. Neuroscientists call this predictive coding. The brain, rather than waiting passively, constantly guesses what it expects to see or hear, and then checks incoming signals against those expectations. In most cases, the guesses are accurate, and you move through the world smoothly. But every so often, the guesses clash with the data, and you glimpse the machinery of perception, the slip of illusion, the trick of sound, the shimmer of ambiguity. An everyday example makes it plain. Imagine you're walking home at twilight. Ahead, you see what looks like a stray cat curled by the hedge. Your mind fills in the details, the arch of its back, the tip of its tail, the stillness of its posture. As you draw closer, the cat dissolves into nothing more than a bag left by the curb. Your observation was not simply passive. It was a dance between guess and data, between expectation and light. In that moment, your consciousness did not just record reality, it authored a version of it, one that existed for you until corrected. This is the bridge between quantum strangeness and daily life. At the smallest scales, particles behave differently depending on whether we look. At the human scale, our perception actively shapes the world we experience. In both cases, the comforting illusion of objectivity begins to dissolve. The universe may be there, steady and vast, but the version you live in is inseparable from the awareness through which you meet it. Einstein's moon, which he insisted must exist whether or not we look, is surely out there. And yet the way you see that moon, its size on the horizon, its golden glow in autumn, even its imagined face smiling back at you, is all constructed by your mind. The moon is real, yes, but the moon you experience is a collaboration, part celestial body, part conscious impression. Consider also how observation changes behaviour, not just perception. Psychologists call it the Hawthorne effect. When people know they are being watched, they act differently. A worker in a factory adjusts their pace under a supervisor's gaze. A student writes more neatly when a teacher hovers nearby. In this sense, observation reaches into the macroscopic world, not because particles shift their wave functions, but because awareness itself changes the flow of events. The line between observer and participant blurs. You might recall the simple act of being in a quiet cafe. The moment you notice someone glancing your way, even for a second, you become aware of how you are sitting, how you lift your cup, how you turn the page of your book. The observation doesn't just reveal you, it reshapes you. The same is true for society at large. Traffic slows when drivers see a police car. Generosity rises when people feel watched, even subtly, by painted eyes on a wall. And so, when we ask whether the observer effect extends beyond the microscopic, the answer is layered. No, your gaze does not alter the spin of every planet or the orbit of every star. But yes, consciousness does shape reality at the level that matters most, the reality of lived experience, from the illusions stitched by your brain to the behaviours nudged by the presence of witnesses. What you observe and how you observe it makes a difference. Perhaps this is why the ancient philosophers so often link perception with truth. Plato spoke of shadows on the cave wall, reminding us that our awareness of the world is but a projection. The Buddhists compared reality to a dream, vivid but shaped by the mind's interpretations. Modern science, in its own way, circles back to the same insight, that the world you experience is not raw data, but the meeting place of cosmos and consciousness. So as you let your body sink deeper into rest, remember, observation is not a passive window. It is a brushstroke on the canvas of reality. The question is not whether the world exists without you. It does. The question is how the world you experience is inseparable from your noticing, your attention, your consciousness. The illusion of objectivity, this comforting idea that reality is purely external, is like mist at dawn, thinning the longer you look. Ahead, we will wander further into this illusion and ask, if objectivity is always touched by awareness, then what does it mean to share a world with others? How do we agree on what is real when each of us filters reality through our own mind? That will be our next gentle step. If perception is as active as we've seen, filling in blind spots, shaping illusions, bending behaviour, then a natural question arises. How can we ever claim to know what's real? After all, the cat by the hedge might be a bag, the blue dress might be white, the voice clip might sound different in every ear. If each observer brings their own colouring to the scene, then where is objectivity to be found? Is it lost entirely, or does it live in some deeper agreement between us? Science, in its quiet way, offers an answer. Objectivity is not the absence of observers, but the convergence of many. Reality becomes reliable not when it is free from perception, but when perception is shared, tested, and repeated. It is not the lone scientist peering through a microscope who defines the truth, but the chorus of scientists across the world who reproduce the result, compare notes, and find the same outcome in their own labs. Picture a pot of soup simmering on a stove. One person tastes it and declares it salty. Another tastes and says it's bland. A third insists it's perfect. On their own, each perception is personal, swayed by preference, memory, or mood. But if a dozen or 100 tasters agree, yes, it is too salty, then a kind of objectivity emerges. The soup itself has not changed. What has solidified is a consensus, a shared description that steadies the shifting ground of individual taste. This is how science builds its world. Not through the impossible removal of the observer, but through the careful weaving of many observers into a net. Each eye, each hand, each note in a lab book is a thread. Alone, a thread might fray. Together, they form something strong enough to hold the weight of reality. But consensus is not always easy, nor is it always permanent. Think of how our shared picture of the cosmos has shifted. Once, the stars were nailed to a crystal sphere overhead, unchanging and eternal. Later, the Earth was placed at the centre, with planets circling like clockwork gears. Then, the Sun claimed the centre, and later still, the entire solar system was revealed to be just one spiral among billions. At each stage, objectivity was not the discovery of a single truth, but the refining of our shared perception, a correction of our collective illusions. And illusions can be grand indeed. Consider the horizon. To each of us standing on the shore, the world looks flat, stretching unbroken in every direction. Only by pooling the reports of sailors and astronomers, only by watching ships vanish hull first over the curve of the sea, did we come to realize the truth. The Earth is round. No single gaze could settle it. Objectivity required the stitching together of countless perspectives. This is in its way reassuring, for it suggests that reality is not a fragile dream sustained only by your personal noticing. It is a tapestry held by many minds, many eyes, many voices in conversation. Even if perception bends and blurs at the edges, even if your brain paints in blind spots or fills the night with imagined cats, the shared world still stands, anchored by the web of agreements we call science. And yet, there is humility here too. Consensus is powerful but not infallible. History is littered with moments when the many were mistaken together, when the Earth was believed flat, when disease was thought to spread by bad air alone, when the heavens were charted with crystal spheres. Reality is patient. It reveals itself only gradually, and always through the filter of human perception. Objectivity, then, is not a final state, but an ongoing negotiation, a conversation that never quite ends. So what does this mean for us, here in the quiet of the night? It means that reality is both steadier and softer than it seems. Steadier, because the world does not dissolve when you close your eyes. It continues, anchored by the chorus of other observers. Softer, because the version of reality you live in, your colours, your sounds, your meanings, is always a collaboration, not a solitary truth. Think of the moon again, glowing above the horizon. To one person, it is a romantic lantern, a silver coin in the sky. To another, it is a navigational marker, guiding a journey at sea. To a scientist, it is a dusty sphere, its craters mapped and measured. Each description is different, each shaped by perception. Yet the moon itself is steady, orbiting quietly regardless of interpretation. Objectivity lives not in erasing the stories, but in weaving them together, recognizing the one body behind the many gazes. Perhaps this is why conversation feels so vital. When you tell someone what you saw, when you share a memory, when you compare notes on a sunset or sound, you're participating in the slow, communal work of reality making. Your perception alone is like a single ripple on the pond, but when joined with others, the ripples overlap and form a pattern that can be trusted. And so, the illusion of objectivity, this comforting idea that reality is untouched by perception, fades into something more nuanced. Objectivity is not the absence of the observer, but the harmony of many. It is a choir rather than a solo, a mosaic rather than a single tile. As you lie back and feel your body grow heavier against the mattress, you might let this thought soothe you. Reality does not depend solely on your eyes to exist. It is carried by the collective noticing of billions of minds, each playing its part. But your gaze, your attention, your quiet participation is still a note in the music. Without it, the harmony would not be complete. Ahead, we will turn from this shared objectivity to older voices, ancient traditions that dared to say consciousness is not just a participant, but the very fabric of existence. Before physics had equations, before science had experiments, sages and poets whispered that mind and cosmos were inseparable. Their voices still echo, waiting for us to listen. We've lingered with particles and patterns, peered at curtains of probability, and listened to physicists debate across centuries. Now let us step back, far back, before detectors, before microscopes, before chalkboards filled with equations. Long before science found its way into laboratories, human beings looked at the stars, the rivers, the forests, and felt a different kind of question rise in their hearts. They didn't ask, what is the particle doing? But what is the relationship between mind and cosmos? Their answers, though spoken in the languages of poetry and myth, still echo in the quiet chambers of philosophy and even in the margins of science today. In ancient India, the sages of the Upanishads whispered that consciousness was not merely a feature of living beings, but the very ground of existence itself. They called it Brahman, the ultimate reality, the infinite, the eternal, and Atman, the inner self. To know one was to know the other, as though the spark of awareness within your chest were nothing less than a reflection of the cosmic flame. You were not separate from the universe. You were the universe, briefly wearing a human form. Across the mountains in China, Taoist teachers spoke of the Tao, the way that flows through all things. They suggested that mind and matter were not two but different notes in the same melody. Awareness was not perched outside the world, watching it unfold, but moving through it like wind through reeds, shaping and being shaped in turn. To live wisely was not to dominate the world, but to align your consciousness with its currents, as a boat aligns with the river that carries it. And in the teachings of the Buddha, consciousness was not treated as an isolated jewel, polished and eternal, but as a process, arising, passing, interdependent with everything else. Just as a flame depends on the wick, the oil, and the breath of air, so awareness was seen as woven into conditions, inseparable from the fabric of reality itself. To awaken, in this view, was not to step outside reality, but to see clearly how deeply mind and world were entangled. These ancient whispers, spoken long before physics, sound strangely familiar beside modern debates. When the Upanishads say that the self and the universe mirror one another, is it so far from today's notion that consciousness may be fundamental, not derivative? When Taoist sages describe mind and cosmos as inseparable currents, is it not an echo of the way physics shows observer and observed intertwining? When Buddhists describe awareness as dependent, conditioned, ever-changing, is it not a cousin of the probabilistic world revealed in quantum mechanics? Of course, the old teachings did not use the word wave function, nor did they speak of electrons or delayed choice experiments. Their language was softer, metaphors of rivers, mirrors, and flames, and perhaps that is why they still soothe us. Science, with its precision, can sometimes feel like a spotlight that makes shadow sharper. The older voices, with their poetry, feel more like moonlight, illuminating without burning, suggestive without demanding. Imagine sitting beside a still pond at night. The moon hangs overhead, its face steady and luminous. On the surface of the water, a second moon shimmers, broken gently by ripples. The ancients might have pointed to this and said, here is the relationship between mind and cosmos. The outer moon is the world, the inner reflection is consciousness. Separate yet inseparable, distinct yet joined, each gives meaning to the other. Without the outer moon, the reflection would vanish. Without the still water, the reflection could not appear. Mind and cosmos as mirror and image, each requiring the other. This simple picture is enough to soften the boundaries that modern thought often hardens. We are trained to think of ourselves as observers perched outside reality, peeking in. But the pond reminds us, to see it all is to be part of the scene. The reflection cannot happen without the surface. Your consciousness, like the water, participates in the moon's presence. Even today, when neuroscientists peer into the brain with their instruments, they confront the same puzzle. They can map neurons firing, chemicals flowing, signals flashing across networks. But none of these measurements explains why the firing of neurons produces the feeling of warmth in your tea, the sound of rain against your window, or the ache of longing in your chest. The ancients did not solve this mystery, but they had the humility to name it. Awareness is fundamental, a fact too basic to be explained away. As you rest here, perhaps with your own breath falling gently into rhythm, you might consider how these whispers still shape us. When you pause to meditate, even for a few minutes, you are echoing the Buddha's insight that mind is not apart from the world, but an ever-shifting process within it. When you marvel at the stars and feel, for a moment, not small but connected, you're echoing the Upanishad's vision of Atman and Brahman. When you let go of pushing against life and instead follow its flow, you are echoing the Taoist teaching of harmony with the way. None of this requires you to believe in myth or abandon science. It only asks that you notice how ancient traditions sensed what modern experiments still wrestle with. That consciousness is not a trivial byproduct, but a participant in the great unfolding of reality. So as the moon glows quietly overhead in your imagination, and its reflection shimmers on the still water of your mind, let the thought settle. Perhaps the universe and your awareness are not strangers but mirrors. Perhaps every time you observe the world is also observing itself through you. The ancients, with their metaphors of moonlight and rivers, gave us a language of connection. But the question of consciousness did not end with their whispers. It found new life in philosophy, where thinkers began to ask with fresh precision, what if awareness is not a rare flame flickering only in human skulls, but something woven into the very fabric of matter? This idea has a gentle but unusual name, panpsychism. At first, panpsychism can sound absurd. How could a stone, a cloud, or a thermostat have anything resembling consciousness? And yet, the heart of the idea is not that rocks are secretly daydreaming or that clouds are plotting their next move. It is simpler, more subtle. Panpsychism suggests that consciousness might not suddenly erupt at the level of brains, as if conjured from nowhere. Instead, it might exist in faint traces everywhere, a fundamental property like mass or charge, present in varying degrees across the cosmos. To soften the thought, imagine the spectrum of temperature. A block of ice at 0 degrees Celsius is cold, yet it still has warmth compared to something colder still, like liquid nitrogen. A flame at 1,000 degrees is hot, but compared to the heart of the sun it is almost cool. Heat exists everywhere in gradations. Perhaps consciousness is similar, not all or nothing, but more like a continuum. Faint in some places, bright in others. Everyday metaphors help here. Think of a simple thermostat on the wall. Does it know anything? Not in the way you do, but it responds to hot and cold, adjusts accordingly, and in a minimal sense it carries information about its world. It is not aware in the human sense, but it is not entirely blank either. Panpsychists suggest that at the very smallest scales, particles too might feel something, not thoughts or feelings as we know them, but a sliver of awareness, a shimmer of subjectivity. This is not a new idea. Philosophers such as Baruch Spinoza in the 17th century imagined mind and matter as two aspects of the same reality, different sides of one coin. More recently, thinkers like Galen Strawson and David Chalmers have revisited panpsychism as a serious contender in the debate about consciousness. Chalmers is famous for framing what he calls the hard problem of consciousness. Why should physical processes in the brain produce subjective experience at all? Why should neurons firing lead to the taste of chocolate, the sound of music, or the sorrow of goodbye? If physics can describe how matter moves, and biology can describe how organisms function, why should any of this be accompanied by experience? Panpsychism offers one gentle answer. Experience doesn't need to be explained away, because it never had to be conjured out of nothing. It was always present, at least in seed form from the very beginning. Consciousness, in this view, is not an emergent miracle, but a fundamental ingredient of reality, woven into atoms and galaxies alike. Of course, skeptics point out the strangeness of this idea. If everything has some trace of consciousness, then what does that mean for a chair, a mountain, or a river? Does a pebble dream? Does a spoon sulk when ignored? These playful questions highlight the risk of taking the metaphor too literally. Panpsychists are not claiming that inanimate objects think in the human sense, but rather that the building blocks of reality may carry the tiniest sparks of subjectivity, which combine and deepen in complex systems like brains. Think of colour. A single red pixel on a screen carries almost no meaning. But when millions of pixels combine, you see a vivid landscape, a sunset blazing over the sea. In the same way, faint traces of proto-consciousness might combine in the brain's intricate networks to create the full richness of human experience. Even if panpsychism feels speculative, it is not entirely whimsical. It solves a puzzle that haunts neuroscience. How do you get from matter that seems entirely unconscious to matter that suddenly is? If consciousness is nowhere, then at some point in evolution it had to pop into existence, a leap with no clear bridge. But if consciousness is everywhere, then evolution did not create it from scratch. It simply shaped it, wove it into new forms, and gave it voice through creatures like us. As you rest with this thought, notice how it resonates with the older traditions we just visited. The Upanishads whisper that your inner self is the same as the cosmos. Taoist sages describe the mind as flowing with the world. Panpsychism, dressed in the language of philosophy, seems to echo them, suggesting that awareness is not a local accident but a universal feature. Imagine standing by the sea. The waves crash, the foam scatters, the salt fills the air. You feel small, yet somehow also part of the vastness. Panpsychism would suggest that this is not just poetry, that the sea, the air, the salt, and you're all woven from the same fabric of awareness, different ripples in a single conscious ocean. Of course, this remains a hypothesis, not a proven fact. You do not need to believe it to let the idea calm you, like listening to a song without needing to know every note's physics. Panpsychism asks you only to wonder, what if consciousness is not rare, but ubiquitous? What if every particle, every grain of sand, every star carries a whisper of awareness? Let that possibility drift through your thoughts like moonlight on water. You may not settle it tonight, nor does it need settling. It is enough to sense that you're not separate from the universe, but part of a continuum of awareness that stretches from the faintest particle to the furthest galaxy. So far, we've drifted from ancient whispers to modern philosophy, imagining consciousness as a kind of shimmer present throughout the universe. But philosophers are not the only ones who have dared to step into this mist. A few scientists too have tried to peer inside the brain and ask, could consciousness itself be quantum? Could the strange rules that govern particles, the same rules that bring us interference patterns and delayed choices, also be at play inside our very neurons? One of the most daring attempts to answer this question comes from a collaboration between physicist Roger Penrose and anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff. Together they propose something called the OR theory, short for orchestrated objective reduction. The name may sound like a mouthful, but the idea can be told in gentler terms. Imagine that deep inside your brain's cells, within tiny structures called microtubules, quantum processes are quietly unfolding. And not just unfolding at random, but orchestrated, organised, tuned like instruments in a hidden symphony. To picture this, think of an orchestra seated in a pit beneath a stage. The audience hears the play above, sees the actors move and speak, but beneath it all lies the music, shaping mood and guiding rhythm. According to Penrose and Hameroff, the brain's visible thoughts, memories, perceptions, decisions may be like the play on the stage, while a hidden orchestra of quantum events provides the deeper music of consciousness. Why microtubules? These are tiny scaffolding structures inside every cell, usually thought of as part of the skeleton of the cell. Hameroff, as an anesthesiologist, knew them well. He suspected they were more than just supports, more like the wiring of a hidden electrical system. Penrose, intrigued by the mathematical puzzles of consciousness, saw in quantum mechanics a possible answer to the hard problem. Why subjective experience exists at all? Together, they suggested that these microtubules might host quantum superpositions, particles existing in multiple states at once, until they collapse in orchestrated patterns, giving rise to the flow of awareness. For many scientists, this sounds wildly speculative. The brain, after all, is warm, wet, and noisy, conditions thought to destroy fragile quantum states almost instantly. Quantum behaviour is usually seen in carefully cooled, isolated systems, not in the bustling environment of neurons. And yet, Penrose and Hameroff argue, microtubules might be structured just right to shelter these delicate processes, allowing quantum effects to persist long enough to matter. If true, it would be extraordinary. It would mean that consciousness is not merely the chatter of neurons firing like digital switches, but something deeper, something entwined with the same quantum fabric that governs particles and galaxies. It would mean your awareness is, in some sense, a quantum song playing through the strings of your brain. But here we must pause, gently, and remind ourselves, this is still a hypothesis, not a settled truth. The OR theory has its critics, many of whom point out that there is little direct evidence of quantum processes inside microtubules, and that other explanations of consciousness, based on networks, information, or emergence, are simpler. Still, the theory persists, not because it is proven, but because it dares to bridge two mysteries: the mystery of quantum physics and the mystery of subjective experience. For bedtime, perhaps it is enough to hold the image. Imagine each thought you have, each dream, each memory, not as mere electrical sparks, but as harmonies played by an invisible orchestra. Imagine that deep within you, tiny quantum notes are struck, reverberating through the vast symphony of your mind. The accuracy of this picture is less important than the sense of wonder it inspires. That awareness, so familiar yet so elusive, might be tied to the very strangeness of the cosmos itself. In a way, it fits the story we've been tracing. Ancient sages told us that mind and universe are inseparable. Panpsychists told us that consciousness is woven into matter everywhere. OR tells us that inside the very architecture of the brain, quantum fabric may be at work, orchestrating experience. Different languages, different metaphors, but perhaps all pointing to the same ineffable truth, that consciousness is not something trivial or accidental, but something fundamental, something that belongs as deeply to the universe as stars and seas. As you rest, consider how this perspective might change the way you see yourself. You are not just a machine of neurons or a passenger in a body. You're part of a cosmic performance, each moment of awareness a note in a symphony as ancient as the universe. Whether or not the theory holds up under future experiments, the image itself is soothing. Your thoughts as music, your mind as orchestra, your being as harmony. And perhaps this harmony does not stop with you. If consciousness is truly quantum, then each mind might be connected in ways we barely understand, resonating like instruments tuned to the same cosmic key. The theory does not claim this directly, but it leaves room for wonder that the awareness in you and the awareness in me may not be wholly separate songs, but variations on a theme carried by the universe itself. So tonight, as you feel your body sink into the mattress, you might imagine your own awareness as part of this hidden orchestra. Notes rising and fading, harmonies weaving together, all carried on the quantum currents of existence. Whether or not the microtubules inside your neurons are playing, the idea itself is enough to lull you into a deeper stillness. For in the end, the mystery of consciousness may be less about proving a theory and more about feeling, in this very moment, the gentle wonder of being aware at all. We have drifted from ancient whispers of Brahman and Tao, through philosophical ideas of panpsychism, and even into the bold speculations of quantum minds hidden inside neurons. Now let us turn to a theory that tries to measure consciousness in a different way, not by invoking particles or mysticism, but by asking a quieter, more practical question. What if consciousness is the degree to which a system is both unified and rich in information? This idea is called Integrated Information Theory, or IIT, proposed by neuroscientist Giulio Tononi. The phrase may sound technical, but at heart it is not so different from the metaphors we've already been using. IIT suggests that consciousness is not about raw computing power, or even about the complexity of the brain alone. Instead, it is about how information is woven together into a single, inseparable whole. To picture this, imagine a choir. If each singer were to sing alone, you would hear many individual voices. Lovely perhaps, but separate. Now imagine them singing together, harmonized, each note responding to the others, the whole greater than the sum of its parts. That unified harmony is closer to what IIT says consciousness feels like. Information integrated so tightly that it cannot be pulled apart without losing its essence. Tononi even gives consciousness a number, a quantity called phi, that represents how much information is integrated within a system. The higher the phi, the richer the consciousness. A brain, with billions of neurons interwoven, has a very high phi. A simple circuit, like a thermostat, has a very low phi. Consciousness, in this view, is not all or nothing, but comes in degrees depending on the depth of integration. The beauty of this idea is that it bridges the mystical and the measurable. It does not claim consciousness is everywhere equally, nor that it is conjured only in brains like ours. It says that wherever there is integration of information, there is some degree of experience, however faint. A bee colony, with its intricate communication, might carry a sliver of awareness as a group. A digital network, if woven richly enough, might too. Of course, IIT has its critics, as any ambitious theory does. Some argue it overreaches, attributing consciousness too broadly. Others say it remains difficult to test in practice. Yet the image it gives us, the choir versus scattered voices, resonates beyond the lab. It offers a way of thinking about awareness that feels intuitive, that what makes you conscious is not just the number of parts you have, but how deeply those parts work together as one. Think for a moment about your own mind. Each neuron fires, each sensation arrives, each memory stirs. Alone, they would be meaningless sparks. But together, they weave the experience of you reading these words right now. You're not a collection of fragments, but a whole, integrated enough that the flow of awareness feels seamless. And integration is not only a property of brains. In life too, we feel the difference between scattered voices and harmony. Consider a dinner with friends. If each person talks over the others, if no one listens, the evening feels noisy but not connected. But if the conversation flows, weaving jokes and reflections, if laughter rises and falls together, the night feels richer, more alive. That sense of connection mirrors the principle of integration, many parts becoming one shared experience. IIT also allows us to imagine something larger. What if consciousness does not stop at individual skulls? What if groups, societies, or even humanity as a whole carry a kind of collective awareness, faint but real, born of our interconnection? When millions watch the same eclipse, cheer at the same game, or mourn the same loss, it feels as though something larger than any one mind is aware. A collective choir, however subtle, singing with one voice. We do not need to prove this tonight. It is enough to notice the resonance. Just as panpsychism suggested a shimmer of awareness in all matter, and Oshar suggested quantum harmonies deep inside neurons, IIT suggests that consciousness is the product of wholeness, of information bound together tightly. The more integrated the system, the brighter its awareness. As you sink deeper into rest, let yourself imagine consciousness not as a fragile spark confined to your skull, but as a pattern of harmony that arises whenever parts come together in wholeness. You're such a harmony, an orchestra of cells and signals integrated into a single awareness. And beyond you, there may be other harmonies, families, cultures, perhaps even the biosphere itself. It is a gentle thought that the universe, wherever it gathers complexity and wholeness, may also be gathering consciousness. Not everywhere, not in everything, but in places where integration blooms. Like fireflies gathering in the night, their lights alone are faint, but together they form a glow that seems almost like a single being. Whether IIT is correct or not, the metaphor is soothing. It reminds us that our awareness is not brittle or isolated, but deeply interconnected. It reminds us that even as we rest, the harmony of our mind continues to play, like a choir singing softly within the halls of the brain. And perhaps, as you listen to the quiet around you, you might imagine yourself part of a larger choir as well. Not alone, but one voice among many, integrated into a harmony that stretches further than you can know. After drifting through ancient philosophies and theories of quantum minds and information, it feels natural to turn the lens inward, towards something closer, something intimate. If consciousness does shape reality, perhaps the most immediate evidence is not in distant particles or cosmic harmonies, but in the way belief changes the body itself. This is the story of the placebo effect, the quiet reminder that what you expect can transform what you experience. At first glance, the placebo effect sounds almost like a trick. A patient is given a sugar pill, told it is medicine, and somehow they begin to heal. Pain eases, symptoms lighten, mood improves. Nothing chemical has changed in the pill, and yet something undeniable has changed in the person. The opposite also occurs in what we call the nocebo effect. If you expect harm, even from something harmless, your body can manifest discomfort, nausea, or pain. It is as though belief itself carries a subtle kind of medicine or poison. Doctors once considered the placebo effect a nuisance, something that clouded clinical trials. But over time, research revealed that it is not just background noise, it is a real, measurable phenomenon. Painkillers, antidepressants, even some surgical interventions show stronger results when patients believe in them. Belief is not just an accessory, it is part of the treatment itself. To picture this in everyday terms, think of a child who scrapes a knee. The wound is small, not serious, but the tears come quickly. A parent rushes over, cleans it gently, and then places a colourful bandage on top. The child looks at the bandage, bright with cartoon characters, and calms. The knee still hurts, but somehow less. The bandage itself is not magical. What soothes is the belief that the bandage carries healing power. Consciousness, in this small way, reshapes reality. Neuroscience gives us a glimpse into how this works. When someone takes a placebo pain pill, their brain can release endorphins, the body's own natural painkillers. Expectation of relief becomes a signal that triggers real chemical change. Belief, translated through the pathways of the brain, becomes biology. In nocebo cases, expectation of harm can raise stress hormones, increase blood pressure, or even create real symptoms like headaches or stomach pain. The body listens closely to the story the mind tells and then acts it out. This interplay between belief and biology is not limited to medicine. Consider rituals. In many cultures, healing is not only about herbs or practices, but about the context of belief, the words spoken, the presence of community, the sense that something sacred is happening. For thousands of years, long before modern science, humans understood that the mind could amplify the body's healing, even if they did not have the vocabulary of neurotransmitters or hormones. Think, too, about the simple comfort of routines. A warm cup of tea before bed, a favourite blanket, a soothing phrase repeated in silence. These are not medicines, yet they ease the nervous system. Placebo, in a way, is not deception, but recognition. Belief itself is a kind of medicine. The sugar pill is only a vessel. The real ingredient is expectation. This raises an unsettling yet beautiful question. If consciousness can alter pain and healing, if it can produce real changes in the body from nothing but belief, then how much of what we experience every day is shaped by the stories we tell ourselves? Pain may not be only pain, but also the meaning attached to it. Healing may not be only healing, but also the trust we place in it. Reality, even in our own skin, is a duet between biology and belief. Of course, placebos do not cure everything. No sugar pill has ever eradicated a tumour or mended a broken bone. Consciousness shapes experience, but it does not bend the laws of physics. And yet, even with these limits, the effect is profound. Pain is eased, mood is lifted, symptoms shift, sometimes dramatically. It is not magic, but it is not illusion either. It is consciousness moving through biology in ways we're only beginning to understand. As you let this idea settle, you might recall small moments in your own life when belief changed experience. The way a simple word of encouragement made a challenge feel lighter. The way a lucky charm seemed to ease nerves before an exam. The way a hug, though not medicine, brought real calm to your body. These are not tricks. They are reminders that your mind and your body are not separate strangers, but dance partners. The placebo effect, then, is not just a quirk of medical trials. It is evidence that consciousness is not passive. It does not merely sit in the theatre of the body watching the play unfold. It participates, whispering cues to the actors, nudging the music, changing the mood. Belief, expectation, attention. These are not just thoughts. They are levers that shift physiology, small but real. And perhaps the lesson here is gentle but profound. Consciousness does shape reality, at least the reality of our own bodies and experiences. Not in sweeping cosmic ways, but in intimate, tangible ones. Every belief you carry is a note in the orchestra of your biology. Every expectation is a brushstroke on the canvas of how you feel. So tonight, as you breathe and feel the weight of rest settling in, you might imagine that your own beliefs are bandages of a sort, stories you place gently over the scrapes and bruises of life. Some soothe, some hurt, some heal more than you expect. In this way, the placebo effect is not just a medical curiosity, but a mirror, showing us how consciousness and reality are already entwined. The placebo mystery showed us how belief alone can bend biology, but that is only one part of a larger story, a story in which mind and body are in constant conversation. To think of them as two separate entities, one ghostly, one mechanical, is an old habit of thought. In reality, they are partners, sending signals back and forth, weaving each moment of your experience together. Consider the simple blush. Someone speaks your name unexpectedly, or you recall an embarrassing moment and suddenly your cheeks warm. No hand touches you, no sunbeam falls upon your face, yet the blood vessels dilate and colour rises. A thought, a fleeting pattern of neurons, translates into a visible change in the body. Or think of fear. You hear a sudden noise in the dark. Before you even name it, your heart has already begun to race. Your breath quickens, muscles tense. Adrenaline surges, preparing you to run or fight. The body responds first, as if it overheard the whisper of the mind before you did. Consciousness and physiology, bound together like dancers moving to the same music. Modern science has traced some of these steps in detail. The brain talks to the body through hormones, through the autonomic nervous system, through electrical signals that race along nerves. Stressful thoughts can flood the bloodstream with cortisol, a hormone that sharpens alertness, but when chronic can wear the body down. Gentle practices like meditation or deep breathing, on the other hand, can calm these signals, lowering blood pressure, slowing the heart, quieting the storm. This is why meditation has found its way not only into monasteries but into hospitals and therapy rooms. Patients taught to focus gently on their breath, to notice thoughts without clinging, often show measurable improvements, reduced stress, improved immunity, even relief from chronic pain. The mind whispers reassurance, and the body listens. Daily life offers countless smaller examples. Imagine the nervousness before giving a speech. Your palms sweat, your voice trembles. The moment passes and calm returns. Or the way joy can energize you, filling your steps with lightness, while grief can weigh you down until even simple movements feel heavy. None of these sensations live purely in the mind or purely in the body. They're woven together, each shaping the other. The mind-body loop also explains why psychosomatic illnesses, conditions where stress or emotion contributes to real physical symptoms, are not mere inventions. Ulcers, headaches, skin rashes, stomach troubles, all can be influenced, worsened, or even triggered by the stories the mind is telling. They are not imaginary, but real echoes of consciousness in the body's tissues. This does not mean illness is all in the mind, nor that one can simply think away disease. But it does mean that the body is sensitive to thought, that consciousness leaves fingerprints in places we often forget to look. In this sense, every emotion you feel is not only a mental state, but also a physical state, a posture, a chemistry, a rhythm of breath and pulse. One of the clearest windows into this dance is the practice of biofeedback. Patients connected to simple monitors, measuring heart rate, muscle tension, skin temperature, are taught to notice how their thoughts and feelings change the readings. With practice, they learn to control what once seemed automatic, slowing the heart, easing tension, warming cold hands. The body becomes less a machine running on its own, more a partner responding to gentle requests. Even the immune system listens to consciousness. Studies show that stress can weaken it, while positive states like optimism or gratitude can strengthen it. A laugh with a friend, a sense of purpose, even the small glow of kindness received, all of these ripple into the body's defences, making them steadier. The old proverb, "a cheerful heart is good medicine," carries more truth than its simplicity suggests. You might picture the mind and body as two musicians playing a duet. The mind strikes a note, an anxious thought, a joyful memory, and the body responds with harmony or discord, racing heart, calm breath, tension, or ease. At the same time, the body strikes notes of its own, a pain in the chest, a hunger pang, a rush of endorphins after exercise. The mind hears these notes and adds its own melody, worry, relief, pride. Together the song of your life is composed. For most of the day, this duet plays quietly in the background, unnoticed. But if you pause, you can hear it. A slow breath calming a restless thought. A sudden worry tightening the shoulders. The loop is constant, but awareness can soften it. When you notice the conversation, you can join it more consciously, sending signals of calm rather than stress, kindness rather than criticism. This is not mystical, it is everyday life, observed gently. When you place a warm hand on your chest and breathe slowly, your nervous system takes the hint. When you speak kindly to yourself, your body releases the grip of tension. When you smile, even before you feel happy, the body responds by releasing chemicals that tilt mood upward. So, the question of whether consciousness shapes reality need not be answered only in particle physics or cosmic speculation. It is answered each time your thoughts change your heartbeat, each time your expectations alter your pain, each time your awareness soothes your breath. Consciousness and body are not separate actors. They are two aspects of the same story, always entwined. As you rest now, you might let your own awareness soften into this loop. Notice the rhythm of your breathing, the weight of your body, the thoughts drifting like clouds. Each one shapes the others, weaving a reality that is uniquely yours. The mind-body conversation is never silent, never still, and tonight it sings you gently towards sleep. So far, we have watched belief soften pain, calm the heart, and alter the chemistry of a single body. But consciousness does not stop at the boundary of the skin. We live in communities, in cultures, in crowds, and in those spaces our beliefs overlap, collide, and sometimes harmonize. The result is not just private experience but shared reality, worlds built from collective expectation. Think first of the stadium. A single person cheering is just a voice in the air, but when thousands cheer together, the air itself seems to vibrate. The players on the field feel it. Adrenaline surges, performance shifts. A game that might have unfolded one way takes a different course because the energy of the crowd becomes part of the event. Nothing physical has changed about the ball or the grass, yet everything feels changed. Collective belief turns atmosphere into force. The same happens in financial markets. Economists often describe them in numbers and graphs, but at their heart they are expressions of human psychology. When enough investors believe the market will rise, they act accordingly, buying shares. Their actions push prices higher, fulfilling the belief. When fear spreads, even without clear reason, panic selling can trigger a crash. These are not illusions. They are realities built on expectation, collective consciousness shaping the flow of money across the globe. History offers even larger examples. Consider the power of myths and stories. Entire civilizations were held together by shared narratives, gods who watched from the sky, ancestors who offered guidance, kings believed to rule by divine right. These beliefs shaped architecture, laws, wars, and peace. Whether or not the myths were objectively true, they became real in their effects. Temples were built, rituals performed, societies organized, all because consciousness converged on a common story. We see echoes of this in modern life. Flags, anthems, and national identities are not physical objects in the same way as rivers or mountains, but they exert enormous influence. A piece of fabric becomes sacred because millions agree to treat it as such. A line on a map becomes a border because societies believe it matters. Shared imagination turns abstraction into reality, and sometimes into life or death decisions. Even smaller communities show the same principle. Within a family, a tradition repeated enough times, a holiday meal, a bedtime phrase, a morning ritual takes on power. The comfort of it is not just in the food or the words themselves, but in the shared belief that they mean something. A whispered goodnight becomes a kind of magic charm, precisely because everyone agrees it carries love. This power of collective belief can lift us, but it can also mislead. The same force that builds unity can also build delusion. Witch trials, panics, and mass hysteria are reminders that shared consciousness is not always gentle. Yet even here, the lesson is the same. Belief shapes experience, not only privately, but publicly. What we imagine together becomes the stage on which we live. Psychologists sometimes call this the social construction of reality, It is the idea that many aspects of what we call real are not found in nature alone, but in agreements between people. Money, for example, is only paper and ink or numbers on a screen. Yet because we collectively believe in its value, it becomes the lifeblood of economies. Without belief, it is nothing. With belief, it moves mountains. This is not to say that all reality is constructed. Gravity does not depend on opinion, nor does the sun need our agreement to rise. But layered atop the physical world is the human world, and in that realm, consciousness is not only participant but architect. Shared beliefs shape laws, customs, markets, traditions, the daily fabric of life. For a gentler image, return to the stadium. The roar of the crowd is not just noise, it is thousands of individual consciousnesses aligning, creating something larger than themselves. For a moment, they are not many, but one, and that unity changes the world on the field below. Perhaps this is why shared rituals, whether religious ceremonies, cultural festivals, or even simple songs sung together, feel so moving. They remind us that we are not islands. Our awarenesses touch, overlap, resonate. Consciousness does not stay confined within each skull, but weaves itself into a larger fabric of collective meaning. And here we see again the echo of integrated information theory. Just as neurons integrate signals into a whole, perhaps human minds integrate into societies, each thought a tiny spark in the larger awareness of culture. We cannot prove this with equations, but we can feel it in the moments when belief unites us, whether in grief, in joy, or in hope. So as you lie here tonight, you might reflect on the shared worlds you're part of, your family, your community, your nation, even humanity itself. Each is a tapestry of consciousness, woven from countless beliefs, expectations, and stories. You're not just an observer of this tapestry. You're one of its threads, shaping the pattern with every thought, every word, every gesture. The mystery of consciousness shaping reality, then, is not only about particles or quantum fields. It is also about how your awareness joins with others to create the world we live in. The game that shifts because of the crowd, the market that rises because of belief, the tradition that comforts because it is shared. Reality, in these ways, is not only discovered but built. And perhaps, if enough minds believe in kindness, cooperation, or peace, the shared world can bend gently toward them too. Consciousness, multiplied, may be one of the quietest but most powerful forces we have. If shared beliefs can alter stadiums, markets, and nations, it is tempting to wonder, could they also bend the future itself? Not just the way we feel about tomorrow, but the way tomorrow unfolds. This is where the question grows most delicate, because science treads cautiously here, and yet there are hints, stories, studies, and simple experiences that invite us to wonder. One such story comes from experiments often cited by meditation groups in the late 20th century. Researchers claimed that when large numbers of people meditated together, crime rates in nearby cities seemed to drop. The effect, sometimes called the Maharishi effect, was debated fiercely. Critics pointed out that statistics are messy, that many factors influence crime, and that correlation is not proof. Supporters countered that the patterns were striking, too consistent to dismiss. The studies remain controversial, but the image they paint is compelling, that collective calm could ripple outward, touching more than the meditators themselves. Even if such claims remain uncertain, we already know that shared attitudes change the course of societies. Movements for justice, revolutions, and reforms all begin as ideas, held in fragile human minds. At first they are whispers, dismissed as unrealistic. But as belief spreads, the whispers become shouts, and the shouts become action. Reality shifts. Not instantly, not magically, but undeniably. The Berlin Wall falls, civil rights are recognized, technology leaps forward because someone believed it could. In this sense, belief does bend the future, not by rewriting physics, but by shaping what human beings choose to do together. On a smaller scale, the same truth plays out in daily life. A teacher who believes in her student changes how she encourages, and that belief becomes a seed of confidence. A community that believes it can recover after disaster rallies with more energy, and the future bends toward rebuilding. A family that believes in kindness passes habits down through generations, and the future bends toward gentler days. Belief alone is not enough. Storms still come, illness still strikes, the world still resists our wishes. But belief changes how we meet these things, and that in turn changes outcomes. The placebo effect whispered this truth at the level of the body. Collective stories reveal it at the level of society. And together they suggest that expectation is not just a passenger in life's journey, but one of the quiet hands on the steering wheel. Think of a flock of birds in flight. Each bird follows simple rules: align, avoid, keep pace. Yet the whole flock moves as if it were a single organism, turning, dipping, soaring in synchrony. Human consciousness is not so different. Alone, one person's belief is like one bird, graceful but small. Together, aligned in expectation, we form patterns that shape history. Where the flock turns, the future follows. There are also subtler ways belief seems to ripple outward. Studies on optimism suggest that people who expect good outcomes often take small actions that make those outcomes more likely. They prepare more, persist longer, notice opportunities others miss. Pessimism, by contrast, can become a self-fulfilling prophecy, shrinking the space of possibility until failure seems inevitable. In this way, belief may bend the arc of time not by magic, but by guiding the steps we take within it. And yet, the mystery remains deeper still. Some experiments in parapsychology, controversial and debated, have suggested that intention might influence random number generators or other sensitive systems. Most scientists remain skeptical, demanding stronger evidence. But even if such effects are never proven, the very fact that humans keep asking reveals a yearning to know whether consciousness has reached beyond the mind, whether it can touch the fabric of reality directly. For now, perhaps the gentlest answer is this: belief shapes the future not by breaking laws of nature, but by weaving meaning, focus, and persistence into the lives we live. When shared, belief builds momentum. When hopeful, it builds resilience. When compassionate, it builds bridges. And when these qualities multiply across communities and generations, the future is not the same as it would have been. So as you rest here, breathing slowly, you might picture the world as a great field of possibility, like tall grass swaying in the wind. Each belief is a path pressed through the grass. Alone, one path is narrow. But when many walk the same way, the trail becomes clear, solid, real. Consciousness multiplied, shapes which trails remain and which disappear. Does this mean we can dream a utopia into being simply by believing in it? No. The world resists and effort is always required. But it does mean that the stories we tell, the hopes we hold, the expectations we nurture are not weightless. They tilt the balance. They give tomorrow its contours. And if enough of us believe in compassion, in curiosity, in care for the earth and for one another, then those beliefs can bend the path ahead, just as surely as fear and hatred can bend it another way. The universe may not hand us proof that consciousness writes the script of reality, but in our daily lives we already see how belief becomes a pen, sketching the outlines of the world to come. The question is not whether we have that power, but how gently and wisely we choose to use it. Every night, without effort, you enter a world that feels astonishingly real. Streets unfold, skies shift, conversations take place, and sometimes even entire lifetimes seem to be lived in the span of a few hours. And yet, when morning comes, all of it dissolves. Dreams remind us that the mind is not just a mirror reflecting the world, but also a lantern capable of creating one. Think of a dream you remember clearly, perhaps a moment of flying, weightless and free, the rooftops falling away as the wind brushes past your face. In the dream, there was no question of whether the flight was possible. It felt true in every muscle, every breath. Only upon waking did you notice the strangeness. In that instant, you moved from one reality to another. Dreams are like private simulations, inner theatres in which your mind rehearses, experiments, and sometimes simply plays. Neuroscientists suggest that dreams may help us process memories, solve problems, or rehearse threats and responses. Whatever their purpose, their vividness is undeniable. The emotions are real, the sights and sounds convincing, the experience complete, until the alarm rings and you find yourself back in bed. This is why philosophers and scientists often use dreams as a stepping stone to larger questions. If the mind can create such convincing worlds on its own, might reality itself be another kind of simulation, vast and complex yet no less convincing? When you wake from a dream, you recognize it for what it was. But what if waking life is also a kind of dream, one we never quite awaken from? Before we reach for cosmic speculations, let's linger with the everyday power of these nightly simulations. In dreams, you are often both observer and participant. You watch events unfold, but you also act within them. You might run through unfamiliar streets, speak languages you do not know, or find yourself in places that never existed yet feel familiar. The dream provides both stage and script, but consciousness provides the experience. Without your awareness inhabiting it, the dream would be nothing but random signals. There is comfort in this. It suggests that your mind is capable of more than passively registering the world. It can weave its own worlds, convincing enough to move your heart and quicken your pulse. A nightmare can wake you in a sweat. A sweet dream can leave you smiling through the morning. The boundary between real and unreal blurs when experience itself is what matters. Daydreams show us the same principle in gentler form. Sitting on a train, you imagine a conversation that never happened, or replay a memory differently, or envision a future you hope for. For a moment, the daydream feels true enough that your body responds. Your heart softens at imagined kindness, or your jaw tenses at imagined conflict. Again, consciousness builds a reality, brief but tangible. These small, familiar simulations are like practice runs for the grander questions. They remind us that experience is not always tied to physical reality. What you feel, regardless of whether it is anchored in the world outside. This parallel is why dreams often appear in discussions of the simulation hypothesis. If consciousness can be immersed in a dream so real you cannot tell it apart from waking life, then why could not a larger intelligence, or the universe itself, generate a reality just as convincing? From inside the dream, you do not notice the seams. From inside waking life, we may not either. But for now, we do not need to decide whether the world is a simulation. It is enough to let dreams remind us of consciousness's power to shape experience. At night, you enter worlds spun entirely from within. In the morning, you step back into the shared world of waking life. In both, awareness is what makes them real to you. Perhaps this is why cultures across time have treated dreams as windows. Ancient Egyptians saw them as messages from the gods. Indigenous traditions around the world use dreams as guides for hunting, healing, or storytelling. Modern psychology has treated them as reflections of the unconscious, clues to hidden desires or fears. Whatever the interpretation, the core recognition remains. Dreams matter because they feel real, because they touch the same consciousness that waking life does. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, you may find comfort in this thought. You are about to enter another reality, one created entirely by your mind, one where anything is possible. You may soar, you may wander, you may meet faces long forgotten. And even though you will return, the dream will still have been real in its effect, shaping your mood, your memory, your sense of self. Dreams, then, are not distractions, but reminders. They remind us that consciousness is not bound to what is out there. It can build, it can weave, it can conjure. They remind us that the line between real and imagined is less about the fabric of the world and more about the feeling of experience, and they prepare us, gently, to wonder about the larger simulation we may or may not be living in. So as your eyes grow heavy, imagine yourself stepping into one of those private worlds, a dreamer's practice for larger questions. Whether or not reality itself is a simulation, you carry the proof each night that consciousness can make a world feel real. That is enough for now to lull you into quiet wonder. If dreams are private simulations conjured by the mind each night, then some philosophers have wondered, what if waking life itself is a simulation? One vast and shared, woven not by neurons alone, but by some deeper machinery. This thought, once the stuff of myth and story, was sharpened into a modern argument by philosopher Nick Bostrom. His question was simple but unsettling. If advanced civilizations can create highly detailed simulations of consciousness, then is it not more likely that we're inside one of those simulations rather than the single, real universe? At first, it may sound like science fiction. After all, video games already create worlds filled with characters, landscapes, and physics convincing enough to lose ourselves in. What might happen if technology continued to advance? Not for decades, but for centuries. If entire galaxies could be rendered, if conscious beings could be simulated so convincingly that they believed themselves real, then how could those beings know whether they were in the original universe or a simulation? And if such simulations outnumber the originals, probability suggests we might already be among them. To make the idea easier to hold, think of a simple metaphor. Imagine a video game character walking across a meadow. The grass bends under their feet, the sun arcs across the sky, the wind stirs the trees. To the character, it all feels real. But behind it lies code, instructions written by designers, translated into light and sound on a screen. The character has no way of knowing they are made of code. They simply live in the world given to them. From our perspective, of course, we know the character's meadow is not real in the same way as our own. But if consciousness can emerge inside a simulation, then for the character, the experience would be real enough. They would feel the warmth of the sun, hear the rustle of leaves, perhaps even dream their own dreams. And if they asked themselves whether their world was simulated, how could they prove it either way? That is the strange mirror Bostrom holds up to us. If we're in a simulation, how would we know? Everything we observe, the stars, the laws of physics, even our own minds, would be part of the program. To question it would be like a character in a painting trying to step outside the frame. Of course, not everyone agrees with this line of thought. Some argue that even if simulations become possible, it does not mean civilizations would choose to run them in such vast numbers. Others say the idea is unfalsifiable. If no test can confirm or deny it, then it is philosophy, not science. Still, the question lingers because it touches a deeper intuition, the sense that reality may not be as solid, as independent, as unquestionable as it seems. And yet, there is something comforting hidden in the unease. If we were in a simulation, would it matter? After all, your experiences, your joys, your griefs, your quiet moments of wonder would still be yours. The hug of a friend, the taste of fruit, the sound of rain against the window, these would not be less real to you because they were coded. Experience is reality, no matter the substrate. In this sense, the simulation hypothesis may not be so different from the dream analogy. In a dream, the world is woven from your own mind. In waking life, perhaps it is woven from physics or from code. Either way, the world feels real because you experience it. The question shifts from is it real to what does it mean to live fully within it? Think of sitting in a theatre. You know the play is not real in the sense that the actors are not kings or queens, the palace is not stone but wood and paint. Yet while the play unfolds, you laugh, you weep, you feel the tension of the story. The emotions are genuine, the experience authentic. Reality in this sense is not about what lies behind the curtain, but about what consciousness feels in the moment. Some physicists even play with the idea that our universe might bear glitches or pixels, signs of being simulated. They look for limits, like the Planck scale, where space and time seem quantized, or for patterns in cosmic rays that might hint at an underlying grid. Nothing definitive has been found, but the search itself reveals something: the human desire to peek behind the curtain, to ask not only what reality is, but what it rests upon. But for a bedtime listener, perhaps the gentlest conclusion is this: whether or not the universe is a simulation, it remains a stage for consciousness. The question is not whether we are lines of code or atoms of matter, but how we live, how we attend, how we experience. The warmth of the sun, the hush of the night, the kindness of a stranger, all of these remain real to the one who perceives them. So as you drift into sleep, let the question soften rather than unsettle. Imagine yourself as both character and player, both participant and witness. If this world is a simulation, then it is a beautiful one, filled with wonders to notice. If it is not, then it is no less wondrous. Either way, the experience of living, of being conscious, is the gift, and that gift remains yours, simulation or not. The simulation hypothesis asks whether reality is something built. The many worlds interpretation asks whether reality is something multiplied. Both are unsettling, both strangely beautiful, and both make us wonder, is the world you see around you the only one, or just one among countless others? The story begins with a young physicist named Hugh Everett in the 1950s. He looked at the strange puzzles of quantum mechanics, the way particles seem to hover in clouds of possibility until observed, and asked a different question. What if the wave function never collapses? What if, instead of one outcome becoming real and the others vanishing, all outcomes become real, each in its own branch of the universe? In one world the particle goes left, in another it goes right. Both are true, both unfold, but in different branches of reality. It sounds extravagant, almost like a fairy tale, yet in some ways it solves the mystery neatly. There is no need for consciousness to collapse the wave. There is no need for probabilities to vanish. Every possibility is realized only in different worlds. The catch, of course, is that we experience just one. To us it looks as though the dice landed on a single number. But according to many worlds, the dice rolled every number at once, each in its own universe. To bring this closer to everyday life, imagine standing at a crossroads. To the left, a quiet street leading to a park. To the right, a busy road lined with shops. You can choose only one. In our ordinary view, when you turn left, the right path vanishes unwalked. But in Everett's vision, both paths are walked by different versions of you. One self wanders among trees feeling the hush of leaves. Another self strolls past windows glowing with displays. Each lives as though it were the only one, unaware of the other. Think, too, of the smallest choices. Tea or coffee in the morning, answering the phone or letting it ring, pausing at a red light or glancing away. Each decision feels trivial, yet in the many worlds view, each one blossoms into branches. Somewhere, another version of you is sipping coffee instead of tea, or answering that call, or noticing something you did not. A tree of realities spreading endlessly, every branch as real as the one you inhabit now. There is both awe and humility in this picture. Awe, because it suggests the universe is unimaginably vast, not only in space but in possibility. Humility, because it reminds us that our experience, precious as it is, may be one thread among countless others. We're not the sole players on a single stage, but one chorus in an endless song. Of course, many scientists remain cautious. The many worlds interpretation cannot yet be tested. It may be elegant, but elegance is not proof. Some find it extravagant to imagine infinite universes springing into being at every quantum decision. Others argue it is no more extravagant than imagining wave functions collapsing mysteriously when observed. In truth, the debate is ongoing, and perhaps it always will be. For you lying here and listening, the question may not be whether many worlds is true, but how the idea feels. Does it make you smaller, just one self among billions of selves? Or does it make you larger, a being whose existence spreads across possibilities, each branch carrying part of your story? Consider memory. Sometimes you recall a choice you might have made differently, a word you wished you had spoken, a step you wished you had taken. In our ordinary view, those paths are gone, left behind. In the many worlds view, they are still alive, lived by another you. That thought can feel haunting or comforting depending on how you hold it. Comforting, because nothing is ever entirely lost. Haunting, because you will never meet those other selves. But perhaps the deepest lesson is gentler still. Even if there are countless branches, you are here, now, on this one. The leaves of the tree stretch endlessly, but your awareness rests on this branch, this moment, this breath. And that is enough. To soften the idea, think of music. A song could have been played differently, with different notes at a different tempo. Each variation is possible, but the one you hear now is the one that carries you, the one that fills the room. The other versions exist in imagination, perhaps even in other universes. But the beauty of music is not diminished by knowing other notes could have been chosen. It is enhanced because you realize how precious the particular arrangement before you truly is. So as you drift toward rest, imagine yourself at the crossroads of many worlds. Perhaps in some other branch you're still awake, reading under lamplight. In another, you're already asleep, dreaming of flight. In another still, you're walking outside, hearing the whisper of night air. All may be true, but this one, the sound of your breath, the weight of your blanket, the rhythm of your heart, is the reality you hold now. And if the many worlds interpretation is correct, then every moment is both singular and infinite. Singular, because you live only one version. Infinite, because all versions live somewhere. Consciousness, then, may not collapse reality at all. It may simply travel along one thread of the vast branching web. And even if you never glimpse the other threads, their existence adds depth to the one you inhabit. After wandering through dreams, simulations, and branching worlds, it may feel as if the ground beneath us has grown unsteady. Reality stretches, multiplies, and even questions its own solidity. But at some point, the practical question returns. What part of all this can consciousness truly influence? Are we co-authors of the universe, or simply witnesses carried along by its current? The answer, like so many in our journey, lies somewhere in the quiet middle. Let us begin with humility. Consciousness, as far as science can tell, does not rewrite the equations of gravity or the speed of light. You cannot, by sheer thought, stop the Earth from turning or reverse the tide. If every mind on the planet wished for the moon to glow green instead of silver, its craters and dust would remain unchanged. The cosmos has its own solidity, indifferent to our desires, and yet, within this vast stage, awareness matters enormously. Not because it bends the laws of physics, but because it shapes the reality we actually live, the reality of experience. Consider two people watching the same sunset. One, weary from the day, barely glances up. To them, the sky's just the dimming of light. The other pauses, breath slowing, and sees colours blooming across the horizon. Violet deepening into indigo, gold softening into rose. The sunset is the same, but the realities are not. Consciousness makes the difference between a fading light and a moment of beauty. The same is true for sound. Imagine two people listening to the same song. One hears only noise, background filler in a busy cafe. The other hears lyrics that echo their own memories, harmonies that tug at their heart. The music is identical, but the world it creates inside each listener is profoundly different. Consciousness does not alter the notes, but it alters the meaning. Food offers another everyday metaphor. A bowl of soup placed before you is, in chemical terms, the same mix of ingredients regardless of who eats it. But to someone who remembers a grandmother making that very recipe, the soup is a vessel of memory, warmth, and belonging. To another, it might be bland or even disappointing. The same molecules but entirely different realities of taste and emotion, constructed by awareness. In this sense, consciousness shapes experience constantly. It does not change the sun, the song, or the soup, but it changes what they are for you. And since your life is not lived in abstractions but in experiences, the role of awareness is far from trivial. The universe might not bend to your will, but your perception bends your universe. This distinction between physical reality and experiential reality is perhaps the gentlest answer to whether consciousness shapes the cosmos. It may not rearrange the stars, but it colours the world you live in. And when many minds join together, as we saw in the last sessions, those colours can become collective, shaping traditions, movements, and futures. But there is another layer to this: attention. What you attend to not only shapes your perception, but often shapes the outcome. A student focusing on their studies may not guarantee success, but attention raises the likelihood. A gardener noticing the soil's dryness helps the plant thrive. A friend listening deeply can heal more than advice ever could. Awareness, directed with intention, becomes influence. Not cosmic, but immediate. Not universal, but intimate. Think of a seed planted in soil. Left alone, it may or may not grow. Watered, tended, noticed, it thrives. Your attention did not alter the laws of biology, but it altered the story of that plant. Consciousness, paired with care, shapes the small corners of reality we touch. Even in physics, there is a quiet echo of this. In the lab, a particle's behaviour depends on how we measure it. In life, a moment's meaning depends on how we notice it. Observation, whether of quanta or sunsets, is never neutral. It participates. Perhaps this is the edge of influence, not omnipotence, not control of the cosmos, but participation in the unfolding of experience. Consciousness is not the author of the universe, but it is a co-author of the life lived within it. You may not move mountains with thought, but you may move hearts, including your own. So, the question of whether consciousness shapes reality can be softened. The answer is yes, always, at the level that matters most, the level of lived experience. What you notice becomes your world. What you attend to grows. What you believe colours the path ahead. The stars may remain distant and indifferent, but within the span of your awareness, reality bends with every breath. As you drift deeper into rest, you might imagine the universe as a vast canvas. The laws of physics stretch across it like the primer, steady and unchanging. But your consciousness is the brush, painting colour, shape, and story onto that canvas. The strokes may be small, but they are yours, and in their quiet way, they make the universe more than matter. They make it lived. After wandering among multiverses and simulations, it feels right to return to something closer. The quiet truth that you, as an individual observer, already shape the reality around you in ways both subtle and profound. The grand questions of physics and philosophy may remain unsettled, but here, in the gentle rhythm of everyday life, consciousness leaves its fingerprints everywhere. Think of planting a seed. The act itself is small, pushing a kernel into soil, covering it lightly, adding water. The seed contains its own potential, coded by biology and time. but your attention makes the difference between a seed forgotten and a seed that sprouts. By noticing, tending, and caring, you become part of the process. Consciousness, directed through simple gestures, shapes the future. What was once bare soil becomes leaves, blossoms, perhaps fruit. This is a kind of observer effect in daily life. You may not alter the spin of particles, but you alter the fate of the seed by choosing to notice it, to nurture it. And in this sense, every small choice of attention is creative. The world grows different depending on where your gaze rests, what you decide to water, what you leave unattended. The same is true for relationships. A kind word spoken in passing may ripple through another's day, shifting their mood, changing how they treat the next person they meet. You cannot measure it the way you measure light waves, but the effect is no less real. Consciousness, expressed as care, reshapes the human environment in which you live. A smile is not a particle, but it can change the trajectory of a moment, even of a life. Mindfulness, that quiet practice of noticing the present without judgment, is another example. When you sit and watch your breath, you are not altering the laws of air or oxygen, but you are altering the way you experience them. Instead of rushing past unnoticed, the breath becomes steady, grounding, a reminder of presence. A cup of tea ceases to be just liquid and leaves. It becomes warmth against your hands, steam rising, a pause in time. Attention transforms the ordinary into the vivid. Psychologists sometimes describe this as attentional framing. What you focus on expands in your awareness. If you dwell on worries, the world tightens. If you notice beauty, the world opens. The world itself has not changed, but your lived reality has. This is perhaps the most practical way consciousness shapes reality. Not by altering the external, but by altering the way the external is received. And that difference makes all the difference. Even in mundane tasks, the observer effect is present. Cleaning a cluttered room is not just about dust and objects. It is about the shift in how the room feels once you have noticed and tended to it. A pile of books, once scattered, becomes a shelf of order. The space feels different because your attention has reconfigured it. What was once overlooked now shines under the light of care. In this sense, every small act of noticing is an act of creation. Not grand creation, not galaxies or universes, but creation at the scale that matters. Your home, your relationships, your inner state. When you water a plant, when you listen deeply, when you pause to watch the evening sky, you are shaping the quality of reality you live within. This is not metaphorical. Neuroscience shows that mindfulness changes the brain, strengthening pathways of calm and attention. Acts of kindness change the chemistry of both giver and receiver, releasing oxytocin and endorphins. Your consciousness, expressed through awareness and action, leaves measurable traces in biology and in the environment. The universe may not bow to thought alone, but within the radius of your life, thought and attention are architects. It is easy to dismiss small choices as insignificant, to think that only grand gestures or cosmic events matter. But reality is not lived in galaxies. It is lived in moments. The tilt of your attention, the tone of your voice, the softness of your presence. These are the brushstrokes painting the canvas of your world. Consciousness does not need to move mountains to matter. It only needs to notice, to care, to attend. Think of a candle in a dark room. Its light does not banish the night, but it changes the experience of the space. A small circle glows, shadows soften, warmth spreads. Consciousness, directed with intention, is like that candle. It may not alter the fabric of the cosmos, but it transforms the atmosphere in which you live. So tonight, as you lie here listening, you might reflect on the ways you're already an observer shaping your world. Each choice of attention is a seed planted. Each act of care is water given. Each breath noticed is a moment transformed from background noise into living presence. You may not collapse, wave functions or rewrite physical laws, but you are no less part of the unfolding. The everyday observer is not powerless. The everyday observer is the one who turns possibility into experience, moment by moment. And in that sense, your consciousness shapes reality as surely as the gardener shapes the garden. By noticing, by tending, by being present. We have seen how the simple act of noticing can shape experience, like planting a seed or lighting a candle in the dark. Now let us take one step further, beyond noticing what is already there, toward creating the conditions for what will be. This is the quiet art of conscious creation, not in the grand sense of conjuring galaxies, but in the humble sense of shaping the mood, the meaning and the story of each day. Imagine the first moments of morning. The alarm sounds, or sunlight slips across the floor, and you rise, still heavy with sleep. In that fragile space between dreaming and waking, small choices ripple outward. Do you reach for the phone and let headlines crowd into your mind? Do you pause, breathe, and set a gentle intention for the day? The world outside is unchanged, yet the world inside shifts entirely depending on which choice you make. Consciousness directs the flow, and reality follows in tone. Psychologists sometimes describe this as priming. The thoughts you carry early in the day become lenses through which everything else is seen. If you begin with tension, the hours that follow may feel sharper, more hurried. If you begin with gratitude or calm, the same hours unfold with a softer edge. It is not that traffic jams or deadlines vanish, but that your awareness reshapes how they are received. The observer does not erase obstacles, but it transforms the journey. Simple practices help anchor this art of conscious creation. Some people journal in the morning, writing a few sentences about what matters to them. Others use affirmations, quiet phrases repeated like mantras, not as magic spells, but as reminders of focus. Still others simply sit with a cup of tea, letting the warmth in their hands and the steadiness of breath mark a beginning. None of these practices change the outside world directly, yet they change the inner atmosphere, and that atmosphere colours everything that follows. Think of how a musician tunes an instrument before playing. The performance is still to come, the audience still waits. But those few careful adjustments, tightening a string, listening for harmony, determine how the music will sound. Conscious creation works the same way. The day ahead may be filled with challenges or surprises, but the tuning of intention shapes how you will meet them. Even in small acts, this principle is alive. Choosing to pause before speaking in frustration. Choosing to notice kindness instead of rushing past it. Choosing to walk slowly to the store rather than hurrying. Each of these choices is like a brushstroke on the canvas of the day. On their own, they seem trivial. Together, they compose a picture, one that you live inside. Science lends support here too. Studies on intention setting show that people who take a few minutes to focus on goals or values often feel more grounded, less reactive. Mindfulness research shows that regular practice alters brain networks, strengthening regions linked to attention and compassion. Even affirmations, when done sincerely, can shift mood and behaviour, not by magic, but by nudging the mind toward constructive patterns. Consciousness, directed gently, becomes a tool for shaping experience. Of course, there are limits. No amount of journaling or affirmations can erase grief, cancel illness, or change the weather. Conscious creation is not about controlling what cannot be controlled. It is about participating in what can be, the texture of attention, the tone of response, the story you tell yourself as the hours unfold. Think of a sailor on a wide sea. They cannot command the wind, but they can adjust the sails. They cannot calm the waves, but they can steer. Conscious creation is the same. You do not dictate the world, but you guide your way through it, and in doing so, you change the experience of the journey. Evening brings another opportunity. Just as mornings can set intention, nights can close with reflection. Some write down what went well, a kind of gratitude practice. Others let the mind replay the day more gently, choosing not to linger on mistakes but to notice moments of connection or learning. These practices, small as they seem, shape not only memory, but also how tomorrow will feel. For the mind carries forward the stories it tells itself, weaving them into the fabric of future perception. As you lie here now, you might reflect on the quiet power of intention in your own life. The words you speak to yourself in the morning, the way you pause before reacting, the rituals you hold sacred, all of these are small acts of creation. They do not rewrite physics, but they rewrite experience. And in the end, experience is the reality you live. Conscious creation then is not a grand claim. It is not about manifesting riches or bending fate. It is about remembering that awareness is active, not passive. It notices, yes, but it also chooses. It chooses where to rest, how to respond, what stories to nurture. And those choices, multiplied moment by moment, create the world as you know it. So tomorrow morning, when light filters in and the day waits quietly, you might remember, you have a role in how it begins. A breath, a word, a note of gratitude. These are not trivial. They are the tuning of the instrument, the brush on the canvas, the sails catching the wind. Consciousness is not everything, but it is enough to shape the story you live. If each of us shapes our inner world through attention and intention, then it is natural to ask, what happens when those small acts accumulate? What if not just one consciousness but many? Millions or even billions bend their gaze in a similar direction. This is the mystery of collective futures, how shared awareness can tilt the course of humanity. Think first of the simplest image, a choir. Alone, one voice carries a melody, fragile and incomplete. With two, harmony begins. With dozens, the sound deepens. With hundreds, it becomes something greater than any single throat could create. Each voice is small, but together, the harmony fills the hall, vibrating through walls and bones. In the same way, each person's awareness may seem limited, but together, our beliefs, choices, and intentions weave a pattern that becomes the future. Consider how societies shift when collective attention gathers. Environmental movements began as whispers, scientists, writers, and activists raising quiet warnings. At first, the world barely noticed, but slowly the gaze widened. More people saw forests shrinking, seas rising, storms growing fierce. Belief in the need for change spread, and with it, action. Laws were written, technologies developed, habits questioned. The earth did not change because of thought alone, but because shared consciousness inspired shared action. Reality bent, not through miracles, but through alignment. The same is true of compassion. When disasters strike, communities rally. Strangers donate, neighbours open homes, volunteers arrive. Why? Because awareness shifts, if only briefly, from individual routines to collective care. Consciousness turns outward, and the future becomes less about one and more about many. Even fleetingly, the alignment of minds creates ripples of healing. This principle appears in darker forms too. When fear or hatred spreads, it shapes the world just as strongly. Wars often begin not with weapons but with stories. Narratives that dehumanize, divide, ignite anger. Shared belief in those stories becomes action, and the future bends toward conflict. Consciousness, multiplied, is powerful. It can tilt toward creation or toward destruction. But here lies the gentle hope. Awareness can be directed. Just as you can set intention for your morning, societies can set intentions for their collective life. Agreements, constitutions, cultural rituals, all are ways of aligning consciousness on a larger scale. They remind us of values, guide us through disagreements, and shape the futures we walk toward. Even small gestures matter. A child taught kindness carries it into schoolyards. A community that celebrates difference weaves tolerance into its fabric. A generation that grows up believing the earth is sacred will treat it differently than one that sees it as a resource alone. Collective futures begin not only in parliaments and protests, but in kitchens, classrooms, and conversations. Neuroscience has shown that empathy spreads. Seeing another person helped can trigger the same brain circuits as helping them yourself. Kindness is contagious, not metaphorically, but biologically. When groups share stories of compassion, their behaviour shifts, rippling outward. In this sense, consciousness is not confined within skulls. It resonates, moves between us, amplifies when aligned. Picture the New Year's countdown, millions of voices around the globe pausing at the same second, or the way a city hushes for a moment of silence after loss. In those instants, individual awarenesses converge. The world feels briefly unified, a single heartbeat. These are reminders that collective consciousness is not only philosophical but experiential. You can feel it in your body when it happens. This does not mean humanity can wish itself into utopia overnight. The challenges ahead, climate change, inequality, conflict, are heavy, real, resistant. But it does mean that the beliefs we cultivate matter. If enough voices sing of despair, the choir becomes bleak. If enough sing of possibility, the harmony shifts. Collective futures are fragile, like seeds in soil needing care to grow. As you listen now, you might reflect on the small ways your awareness contributes. When you recycle, you cast a vote for a sustainable future. When you listen with patience, you model a different kind of conversation. When you encourage kindness, you ripple belief outward. Alone, it may feel small, but in the choir, every note matters. Without your voice, the harmony is incomplete. In this way, consciousness shapes reality not only in private but in public. The world you wake to tomorrow is partly the product of what billions believed and acted upon yesterday, and the world that comes after will be shaped by what we choose to notice and nurture now. The question is not whether consciousness has influence, but what kind of influence we allow it to have. So tonight, as you drift toward rest, imagine yourself in that choir, one voice among many. The melody is still unfolding, the harmony still fragile, but it is real. Your awareness is part of it, your beliefs, your intentions, your quiet acts of care. Each is a note in the song of the collective future. And perhaps the most soothing thought is this: you're not alone in shaping it. Countless others scattered across the globe are planting seeds of their own, lighting candles in the dark, tuning their instruments for tomorrow's music. Together, we are already composing the future, whether we notice or not. By noticing, by caring, by aligning, we can make that future gentler. We have travelled a long way tonight, through slits of light and clouds of probability, through ancient whispers and modern theories, through the quiet mysteries of belief and the shared fabric of collective futures. And now, as we reach the final stretch of this wandering, it is time to soften the pace, to let the questions linger without pressing for answers, and to rest in the simple wonder of being here, conscious between dream and reality. The story began with the observer effect, that strange suggestion from physics that particles behave differently when watched. From there, we discovered that even our own perception is not passive but creative, filling in blind spots, shaping illusions, making meaning. We drifted through traditions that saw consciousness as fundamental, philosophies that imagined awareness woven into matter, and theories that placed quantum harmonies within neurons or integrated information across networks. We listened to the body whisper back to the mind, through placebos, hormones, and heartbeats, and we watched how belief ripples outward into communities, economies, and societies. Then we let imagination stretch further still, into dreams as private simulations, into questions of whether the universe itself might be a vast simulation, into many worlds where every choice blossoms into branches. And finally, we return to the human scale, to the everyday observer watering seeds, to the art of conscious creation in our mornings and evenings, and to the choir of collective futures sung by billions of voices. What ties all of these together is not certainty but wonder. At every step, the question remains open. Does consciousness collapse the wave function, or merely interpret it? Is awareness fundamental or emergent from matter? Are we dreaming within a dream, or living in the only universe there is? None of these questions are settled, and perhaps they never will be. But as you lie here, eyes closed, body heavy, mind drifting, perhaps you can feel the beauty of that uncertainty. For it means the story is still unfolding. It means you are part of a mystery too vast to finish. And in the end, maybe the gentlest truth is this: whether or not consciousness shapes reality on the cosmic scale, it shapes your reality every moment. It colours sunsets, flavours soup, softens the voice of a friend, magnifies joy, and reshapes sorrow. It decides what you notice, what you carry, what you create. Reality is not only out there in galaxies and equations, it is here in your breath, your senses, your awareness. Imagine for a moment lying at the border of two worlds. Behind you, the day with all its noise and demands. Before you, the dream with all its strangeness and freedom. Consciousness is the threshold, the door you step through each night. And even as you dream, you remain aware, if only faintly, that both worlds are real to you in their time. The border itself, the in-between, is where we are now, resting between questions and answers, between waking and sleeping. Perhaps this is what it means for consciousness to shape reality, not to write the script of the universe, but to illuminate the stage you stand on. The spotlight of your attention turns possibility into experience. Without it, life would be a blur of maybes. With it, life becomes the vivid, fleeting, precious story you know as your own. And so, as this journey comes to its close, let us not chase conclusions but settle into wonder. The universe may be infinite or simulated or branching endlessly, or maybe simple and singular, solid as stone. But either way, your awareness of it, your noticing of a star, your listening to a song, your drifting into sleep, is what makes it real to you. You're part of the story the cosmos tells itself, a chapter written in the quiet language of perception. Now, let your body soften fully into the bed. Let your breath flow without effort. The questions can wait until morning. The mysteries will still be there. Tonight, you need only rest in the gift of awareness itself, the miracle of being, of noticing, of drifting between dream and reality. And so we close, as always, in the gentle way of the sleepless scientist. Whether your eyes remain open or are already half closed, whether you're still listening or already slipping into dreams, thank you for being part of this journey. If you wish, you may return again to wander with me through other questions, other mysteries. For now, rest easy. Time has a way of slipping through our fingers, but here, in this quiet moment, it pauses just long enough for you to sleep peacefully, wherever and whenever you may be.